Hello everybody. Are you watching at the same time? Yeah. Cool. Okay. So we'll just wait for a few more people to turn up. As explained in the description. Oh, we're shooting this. Oh, crazy cat! Look at that. We're shooting this on the computer, but the likelihood is it will kick us all out, and we'll have to do it on the phone. So I have a massive cat behind me. Co-host of this live. So yeah, today I thought, because I always get caught up in that question, people ask me, oh, what are your influences? And because I'm on the spot, I'm always like, oh, I don't fucking know, you know. So I decided today to think about it a little bit, and I came up with a bunch of stuff. Right, and there's some more there to talk a little bit about what kind of film Derelict should be, or at least will try to be. And so we have two viewers. Make yourselves known. See who you are. And I will get started in order. So Derelict is the wife. I will love that. Even though you're actually in the same room as me, which is weird. But that's okay. So, Derelict is a revenge thriller. Which means that there's definitely going to be a few revenge-based films in that big pile of movies. But that's not the only thing. I wanted to try and think a little bit more kind of abstractly about what's going to make Derelict. One of the things that I tend to do is I tend to pick left, right, and center ideas and concepts and this sort of thing. And so my films are usually a kind of a compilation of all sorts of things that I like. So for example, Wyvern Hill was really that bizarre horror kitchen sink drama. There's some more straightforward stuff in there that we'll find out in a minute, but as a whole, I'll start showing you this, for example, that might be intriguing. A bit of early Peter Jackson, we'll talk about it. But there's also a thing that kind of captivated me, is I wanted to kind of get back to my roots. For those who don't know, I was born in France, so a lot of those, a lot of films that I find myself kind of drawn to are French films these days, like all the French films. So we'll talk about that as well, which is bizarre, because when I lived in France, that was the thing I was completely allergic to, French films. But now, I kind of find myself back into that sort of thing. So with Derelict, that was a thing that was always going to be part of the process, was the French films. So if you're watching this, make yourselves known in the comment as well. That would be excellent, so I know there are people watching, even though this gets recorded anyway. And we are likely to get kicked out by this computer, which is very frustrating. But if that's the case, I will do the rest of it on my phone, so no problem at all. Alright, so let's get started. Where should we start? An obvious one. Get Carter. I don't think these days that you can... yes, I am a sado. I keep my things wrapped in plastic just so they don't get damaged. I know, this is terrible, but that's what I do. So you have to cut them there on the side and so on. Anyway, Get Carter. I don't think you can talk about revenge films, making revenge films in the UK, and not mention Get Carter, which is, I mean, it doesn't even need introduction anymore. So yes, Get Carter. I was lucky enough to actually do an interview of Mike Hodges recently for Ara video. That's terrible, I'm advertising the BFI and I'm talking about Ara, but anyway, I was lucky enough to actually sit in a room for a whole day with Mike Hodges and discuss his work, and Get Carter was obviously one of the things we discussed. That was obvious. And what I found out, which was very interesting for me, is that actually Mike Hodges was the same age as me when he made his first feature, so we had quite a good discussion on that. Yeah, very influential film, obviously. You cannot mention that film without somebody whistling the first few notes of the score. Astonishing performance by Michael Caine, amongst other things. Probably one of his best. He's got such commanding presence in this movie. But what I love about it is the kind of social realism of it. Shot, in the poorest areas of the UK at that time, and that's kind of the things that I'd love to be able to achieve, is to get that kind of social realism that Get Carter got, without denying the genre. I think that's what's very important, is that this is a genre film, but there's that kind of social context to it that gives it a kind of enduring presence. I think it's about poverty essentially, and it's a beautiful film. It's absolutely stunning to look at as well. So yeah, definitely this film, huge influence on Derelict. There is no way you can avoid it. I mean, anybody that's making a revenge movie in the UK and saying, oh, Get Carter, lying. There's no way. This is the British revenge movie. Probably even, for me, probably the British gangster movie. I know that's a cliche, everybody thinks that, but this is it. So Corin likes French films. So do I. Let's see if I have some in there that you might not have seen. So if you like French films, let's actually start talking about a few French films. What we got in here? Right. This is one that's a huge influence for me on Derelict, and it's a film called Ciao Pantin by Claude Berry. And that's literally, that would be, if I could make Derelict the way I wanted to, with the budget that I want, and I would want it to feel like this movie. It's such a realist film, and what I love about it is that the revenge is actually a very small part of it, but most of the film is built on that kind of relationship between two lost souls, one of which is played by a very famous comedian, Coluche, used here in a completely non-comedic way, and he is actually fantastic. I love this atmosphere of bleakness and despair that comes from everyday life. He essentially plays a gas station attendant who becomes friend with one of his dodgier customer, and essentially it turns into a revenge story as the film goes. But it's that beautiful friendship where you find out there's no spoilers, because this is essentially revealed in the first few scenes of the movie, but you find out this guy's lost a son, and essentially he kind of sees a bit of his son in the guy that he's becoming friends with, and there's that kind of relationship that is born between those two, and that was very important for me for Derelict, that the film was built on human relationships, and how they kind of drive the story forward. So for example, Abigail's father, her relation to her father, even though he's not in the film a lot, her relation to her father is what drives the film, the film's emotional core. And then with Matt's story, Matt's relation to his brother is what drives the story forward. And so that, to me, that is a wonderful film that I don't think a lot of British people have seen. Essentially, I don't even know if it got a British release, but very, very famous film in France. I don't think you could have grown up in France, being my age, and not seen this film on TV. It was on every week, every month. Very bleak film, beautifully acted, actually very beautifully shot as well. It's kind of very, very grim atmosphere. It's that kind of end of the 70s, early 80s Paris mood. Everything is kind of grey and blue and beige. There's still traces of the punk culture in there, with one of the characters played by Agnès Soal. And it's a really, overall, very interesting movie. Very interesting for also the political context that France was in at the time. As always, obviously, with genre films, they're also they also tend to be a metaphor of their time, so they're really interesting to look at. And this is a fantastic film, and I can't recommend it enough. Another French film that is a huge influence. This one is literally a classic. It's an absolute classic. It's Série Noire, Alain Corneau. And the reason for this is, what I love about this film is that it's an adaptation of a very famous American writer whose name has completely escaped me. I think it is. I can't remember. Jim Thompson. That's the one. Jim Thompson. Very famous American writer, kind of pulp noir novels and stories. And what I love about this is that he makes it a very French affair. It feels very French. It feels very. So he kind of adapted it in a way that would be immediately identifiable for French people, but also kind of. The work of adaptation is done on things that are typically French. So the character feels French, the setting feels French. So it's not trying to emulate American film noirs. It's very much a French film noir. And what I love about it, that really influenced Derelict, is that the crime itself in this is so grim, so realistically grim, and that's something I wanted to get to with Derelict. I wanted it to all feel a little bit pathetic, a little bit like, oh God, this is really the sort of thing that you kind of read in a newspaper and you're just like, oh really, oh this is yeah. So the kind of newspaper story that you would literally cringe at because it's so kind of everyday darkness, and this is what this film does so well. It's about the everyday bleakness. And what leads people to crime, the despair that leads people to crime. It's absolutely beautifully acted by Patrick Devers. I think it's probably his most famous role. It's a stunning performance, and there's an early performance by Marie Trintignant as well, who is also absolutely fantastic in that. This whole film is just worth a watch, but you have to have a strong stomach. Like it's not. I have a hard time seeing it as a genre film. It's definitely a film noir, but it's so socially realistic and socially aware that it kind of comes across as a very raw drama, with some very dark social edges. I mean, to be honest, late 70s, early 80s French cinema is sometimes very grim. And this is one of them. Probably one of the grimmest. Actually, it is really something to behold. And if I could get literally an ounce of this in Derelict, I would be more than happy. Carry on with the French before we move on to something else. This movie, The Old Gun, Le Vieux Fusil. So with this one, it's not so much that I want Derelict to feel like that. It's very much a classic film about, without spoiling too much, about a man who takes revenge on the Nazis. There's a very harrowing scene with Romy Schneider, which is just absolutely traumatic. But it's this vision of revenge that I like particularly with this, where it's not about so much about badassness and kicking ass and any of that. It's about an everyday person being in a situation where they essentially have no choice, and they're being eaten by their desire for revenge. And I absolutely think this is absolutely stunning film. And the scene in question with Romy Schneider is very famous, but it is atrocious. It really is. It's shocking. I know a lot of people love horror films. I'm a huge fan of horror films as well. For me, you want to see true horror, you get to that scene with Romy Schneider, and it's genuine horror because it feels true and it feels real. And that, to me, that's always more shocking than any buckets of blood or anything like that you can see on the screen. Is the reality, the grim reality. That's what I want to reach with Derelict is a kind of grim reality. And I think we're kind of halfway there in a sense, because the people that have read the script, some of the reactions have been very interesting. I keep telling that story, but well, our writer Michael Mackenzie, when I sent him the first draft and I told him it's a bit bleak, and his response was a bit bleak, I would call it relentlessly grim. So that was very interesting in what we're trying to achieve with Derelict. It's not going to be a film that has a ton of gore or anything like that. I don't think it's going to be needed, but it's a film that definitely delves into a very real dark violence, and that for me, if you want to, if that's something that you're interested in, as well as a beautiful love story, because that's the trick of this. The reason it feels so shocking and violent is because at the core of it there is a wonderful love story between Romy Schneider and Philippe Noiret, and that's the core. That's the emotional core. For me, you have to love the character. You have to love what they're going through for it to feel anything that they're feeling. And when what happens to her, you feel his anger and you feel his rage, and you feel everything that he's going through, and that's what makes it so shocking. A beautiful film. I cannot recommend this enough. What's next? Right, well, this one's pretty obvious. I've mentioned it many times. La Haine. I think this is probably the one of the most famous French films to ever reach the UK. I think it was shown on Channel 4 multiple times. It's a BFI release, so it's a very well-known film. I grew up in a very dodgy area of France, and so I was maybe 12 when this was released. It was something that couldn't be missed. It had so many. It had a huge effect on people. It created a massive thing, a massive conversation around the conditions of people who live in the poorest areas of France. So you couldn't miss it. And recently, I was watching Romain Gavras's Athena on Netflix. Interesting film. But reading an interview with him, they coined that phrase of the children of La Haine, and I thought actually that's a very interesting way to put it, because I think that anybody that was my age when this film came out feels that this is a huge influence, and anybody that wants to make film feels this is a huge influence on them. Obviously, the black and white was a big thing. It was a big decision for me to go to black and white. Obviously, when you shoot black and white, part of the trick is it's much harder to find distribution. It's much harder to distribute because the distributors aren't keen in that sense. I think the audiences don't care. Films find their audiences, and audiences do appreciate black and white. I think Kenneth Branagh proved it not long ago with his latest film. But distributors are kind of icky about it. And so it's always a kind of a tough decision. But when you see this, the black and white makes so much sense that you think, yeah, it's all about storytelling. So it's all about what your creative decisions are going to do to your story. And for me, the black and white was obvious for Derelict, partly because I wanted to touch in kind of the same thing that La Haine touched on. Obviously, without any pretensions, I'm not saying we're going to do La Haine. This is a once in a lifetime. I mean, even Mathieu Kassovitz himself couldn't reproduce La Haine. You know, he tried, but he's could forever be the director of La Haine on anything. But part of the decision of doing black and white came from this. That was not the only film that kind of swayed me towards the black and white, but that was one of them. And we'll talk about what the other one was in a minute, which is also very interesting. But this film, it's all about social anxiety and social angst, essentially. I don't know how much of the social context is known here in the UK, but it came out at a time where the problem of les banlieues, which is those, which we have here in the UK, of course, but I was talking with Virginie Selavi not long ago, actually, and she was saying how different it is in France. There are literally areas in France which I don't even think rich people could actually understand how this works. But anyway, what's great about this movie is that I think it's still extremely powerful, even if you don't get the entirety of the social context of the time, because what he managed to do, and I think that's what he missed in his follow-ups, he managed to do a very universal story, because those three characters go through a journey, and it's actually about friendship, and it's actually about um, it's about how, well, I mean, that's what it's called, and it's how hate breeds hate, essentially. And so I think it speaks to generations and to different culture, and that's what's fantastic about this movie. Whereas his following films, they had a much more particular context. Or when he made films in America, they had pretty much a lack of any social or cultural context. I'm not a big fan of his American films, but anyway, this is if you've not seen this, yes, and this is a major influence on Derelict. But if we're going to talk about the black and white on Derelict, there's actually a very interesting film that we have to talk about, and so I got the box set here of Old Boy, Mr. Vengeance, and Lady Vengeance. So I'm a huge fan of Old Boy. I mean, who isn't? Old Boy, it's a masterpiece, there's no denying it, and probably the strongest of the trilogy. But for my money, I absolutely love Lady Vengeance. I think it's got a weirder edge than Old Boy. It's kind of more poetic, and I love this kind of take on the female in prison movie and the female revenge. It goes into some very bizarre visual concepts. Yeah, it's hard to explain. It's kind of a visceral experience. But here is where it gets interesting, is that there is this version, which is an old DVD. I don't even know if it's been released in that version since. But what's very interesting about this version is it contains the director's cut. And what's interesting about the director's cut, that not a lot of people have seen, is that as the film progresses, it goes into black and white. So as her vengeance gets fulfilled, the color gets sucked out of the film. That was something that always fascinated me, because in terms of storytelling, I kid you not, the film is pretty much exactly the same. The director's cut is the same, except the color gets sucked out of the film and it changes the film altogether. And that, to me, that was always something that I thought was quite significant. So when the decision came to make Derelict, I thought, well, here's the thing, because we have a script that is spliced into chapters, I think it would be really interesting for the film to actually mix color and black and white. And we're taking it a slightly different direction, because essentially it's all about the color reappearing in the film and disappearing in the film at different points when the stories cross paths, essentially, because it's actually two different stories that end up on a collision course. But the decision to do it that way came from this movie. There is literally no denying that. It's a fantastic film. I think it wasn't as popular as Old Boy because I think it's a bit more bizarre, essentially. It genuinely is very bizarre, but it's fantastic. It is a wonderful film. Don't need that one. Right, another one that's interesting for me, because I have a love-hate relationship with it, is this movie. I was talking to one of my actors, Darren, and he's playing a less than savory character in this movie. And what was funny is we had the same reference, because when we discussed this scene, he said, "Oh, have you seen Harry Brown?" And I was like, "Well, actually, yeah, the scene that I wrote, that was the inspiration. There's a scene in there with Sean Harris just slightly before he became a massive star. He was on his way up, but his performance is just absolutely gross. It is so gross. It is so, yeah, it's a disturbing performance. The love-hate relationship with this movie is actually, I think it's got a nasty bite up to halfway, and then then it kind of gives up its thing. It's also politically a little bit against my own belief, but I don't mind that. I don't actually mind a film that opens up the discussion. My issue is that because it loses its bite, it kind of also loses its sense of the conversation that it should install. It kind of makes a massive narrative compromise by the end of it, and it, because of that, it loses its bite. And because it loses its bite, it makes it actually, in my opinion, a little bit more condemnable, because it kind of kills the conversation that could arise from having a film that takes full responsibility for its vision of the world. And it's a fairly bleak vision of the world up to, an hour into the film, where it kind of starts losing its bite a little bit, and it goes into a narrative idea that I find actually less effective and less convincing. But for about an hour, it's as brutal and grim as it gets. Very bleak. The vision of gang culture in the UK is pretty nasty one, albeit quite cliche as well. But this whole cultural shock where generations clash with one another, that was something that I found very interesting. And that scene with Sean Harris, it's, yeah, you don't get much grimmer than that. The film itself, maybe not, but that scene is something, and that is the kind of tense, shocking moments that I was keen to reproduce with Darren, in his character of Cal in the film. We won't spoil it, but there's some pretty shocking things happening with that character, and it was funny. Darren and I had the exact same vision for it, which came from this movie, essentially. We're going to go into some more bizarre things, I think, as we go. Here's another French one, very different. That might surprise a few people. Jean de Florette and Manon des Sources. And this, what's very interesting about this is even the way that they sold it. This is the Shout Factory thing. They sell it like this kind of French romantic thing. It's actually the nastiest revenge drama that you can possibly think of, and it takes place on two different periods, which was very interesting for us because our stories take place with a difference of 10 years between them. And this is actually, I remember showing that to Sarah. If she's watching, she might confirm. And it starts with the little music, and this is going to be a lovely film about Provence, and it's quite beautiful and beautifully shot. The production is actually amazing. But as especially Jean de Florette, as the film progresses, it is, isn't it? It's just absolutely shocking. It's a nasty movie. It's very violent. It is grim. Yeah. The first one is extremely grim, but then that revenge, right? That revenge, yeah, that's if you want to see an actual revenge movie that will shake you to your core, that's it. And it is amazing. Absolutely, it's absolutely perfect revenge film. It's heartbreaking, it's horrible, it's violent. What's very funny is that what we were watching recently, where we were watching some show on Amazon, and they were talking about The Godfather, and instead of the Godfather music, they had the music from Jean de Florette, because actually very close, but they were not far off, actually. It's pretty much what I imagine a mafia epic would look like if it was done properly in France. Depardieu is amazing, that's true. I also think Daniel Auteuil is absolutely amazing, and actually I also think it's Emmanuel Béar's best performance. So this is something to look at, it's something to behold. It's absolutely stunning. The images are beautiful, the setting is beautiful. It should be romantic and pretty, but it isn't. It is absolutely heartbreaking, damaging stuff. Very violent, not so much visually, but morally. It is the most violent movie. I don't think you can get much more violent than that. Honestly, it's brutal, this movie. It's brilliant. So, massive influence on Derelict this. I'm actually a huge fan of French films of that era. This again, having grown up in France, it's not something you could really avoid. Um, but then you kind of get into shock when, yeah, dude, Craig. Oh, seriously, man, this is yeah. You look at it. The shocking thing is that when you grew up in France, you kind of grew up with La Gloire de mon père et Le Château de ma mère, which are like Marcel Pagnol stories, and you know they're quite lovely and they're a bit cheesy and all that, and then you go into this and you go, oh yeah, all right, all right, yeah, this is some nasty shit. So these two guys, essentially, the story, these two guys, all right, you see them? Okay, yeah. So they have no, it's not them actually. So the guy behind, the guy with the mustache, and then you have Gerard Depardieu. The guy with the mustache and his nephew are after water that is on Gerard Depardieu's property, right? And they wanted to be able to grow poppies, okay? But this guy's bought the property and he's a city guy and they're country folk, and so they don't really like him living there. So they block the source of the water. And so this guy essentially spends the duration of the film trying to find the water because he's trying to farm his land and he doesn't have any water. And these guys are like, well, you know, unlucky. Now I won't spoil it, but I can tell you it goes into some very brutal territory. Like this is it's morally just completely bankrupt, but also beautiful. And so the first part is Jean de Florette. That's what happens in Jean de Florette, and then Manon des Sources, Manon of the Spring, is the follow-up. And she doesn't take kindly to what they did to her father, essentially, you know. So it's very interesting. Honestly, yes, you wouldn't believe looking at it that that is this sort of thing, but it's dark. It's as dark as it gets, honestly. And it's also, I think, it's brilliantly made. It's so beautiful. The music is gorgeous. The acting is amazing. Yeah, total recommendation here. This is amazing. Gonna go into something a little bit bizarre. Martin, George Romero, huge influence. Why? Because what I love about George Romero is that kind of realistic approach to genre film, right? This one is particularly, I could have picked any of his film all the way up to the 90s, but this one is particularly interesting because he goes into a very well-known trope, which is the vampire, and he does something with it that is just shockingly realistic. And I love that, and that's what I wanted to do with Derelict. Is I wanted to do a traditional film noir, a traditional revenge movie, but go into some realistic territories that people might not necessarily expect, and going to something that's a little bit pathetic, a little bit dark, with a little bit of dark humor, fairly violent, but also something that actually has some kind of significance in the context that we live in. And Derelict is all about class wars, essentially, in my mind anyway. That might not come through in the final film, but that's what it feels like. And so this film, if you haven't seen it, Craig is still watching. Have you seen this? If you haven't, I would recommend it. It is probably one of George Romero's best. I think there's a new restoration being made, but it's been going on for quite a bit. So I don't know when that will be out, but that's an old French DVD. And this film, actually, I've not seen it in a while, so I don't know how much detail I can go into, but because actually it's not the kind of film that I watch over and over again. Weirdly enough, I absolutely adore it. I think it's probably one of Romero's masterpieces, but it's actually a hard watch. It's very violent. I think it was also George Romero's favorite film of his, according to a quote that I read. That was the one where he was most pleased with the difference between the script and the final results. So yeah, and it's a brilliant film. It goes into the whole mythology of the vampire, but it kind of turns it on its head into a realistic thing. And in my mind, that's the only time where I was really, really entirely successful without the fantasy element. So that's a great, great, great movie. And if I could reach even a quarter of the quality of this with the blend of genre and social realism with Derelict, Yeah, that would be amazing. More weird shit. This crazy thing. This one? Have you seen this one, Craig? So, for those of you who know who Vincent Cassel is, that's him there. This is what I love about this film is it's got a crazy energy. It's got no limits whatsoever. I love it. I love also that it's a film that essentially it's a folk horror, right? So this is a French malaise des banlieues folk horror, which means that it's essentially about the unease of the same neighborhoods as La Haine we were talking about, but wrapped into a folk horror movie. So this is it's as crazy as it gets. It gets very bizarre, and I actually weirdly love the first part more than I love the second. The first part, it's got that sort of crazy no limits thing with the character, the youth character, where they go onto this weird kind of journey. It does look like Joe. Everything looked like Joe. Look at him. That's Joe. That's our mate Joe. No, it's not. It's Vincent Cassel. Vincent Cassel gives an absolutely hilarious performance in this. To be fair, one of the questions that comes back a lot also is, if you could, who would you work with? What actor would you work with? Cassel. I'd love to work with Cassel. I think he's a really interesting actor. He makes some very interesting career choices. What year released? Oh, good question. I tell you what. I think it was 2003 or 4. John. I don't know if you'd like that, John. It's very not everybody likes it. To be honest, it's the kind of film that I'll happily show, but only to certain people. It's very strange. It's a very traditional folk horror. There's no surprise as far as the folk horror, but it's the way that it's put together with those characters from this kind of youth French neighborhoods, French banlieue. That they, after a fight in a nightclub, they kind of end up going. Yeah, well, you'd probably like that one then. So this is about four guys who go in a nightclub one evening, and there's a hip hop party, and there's a DJ. The film opens with the DJ's face, and it's quiet, and he's shaking his head, and he goes, "You all right?" And you hear people going, "Yeah, yeah, you're feeling hot, aren't you? Yeah, all right." And he goes and presses the music, and then it's basically a wild ride for like an hour and a half. They end up having a fight, breaking a bottle on some guy's head, and then they have to run to the country, and they end up in that guy's farm, Vincent Cassel, and things become very weird, very overtly sexual, very dirty, very violent, very gory. Quite a nasty film, actually. Yeah, John. If you can find it, yeah, it is insane. I'm glad you remember it. Actually, I'm glad you remember it. There's a very interesting scene involving a plate of cold meat and a dog. I won't say any more than that. I'll probably get banned. But yeah. As far as French extreme cinema goes, it's one of those that actually did fairly well in France. And Kim Chaperon then, he went on to do essentially a remake of Alan Clark's Scum, which wasn't fantastic. But this was this was his first feature after doing some stuff with Courtage May. Vincent Cassel is hilarious in this film. Yes, it really is as well. There's a scene that involves them going swimming in a cave, and he offers to lend one of the character a pair of his underwear, and it's it's interesting. But it's one of those, actually, as far as extreme French cinema, it's probably the least well known of the lot abroad. Which isn't all that surprising, I think. It's got a very French vibe. But great movie. Not a lot of people like it. Even some of my friends are probably gonna take a massive shit on my head for talking about this movie. That's fine. I love this movie, and I would love see a Blu-ray of this movie. But as far as Derelict goes, it's that kind of no limit nastiness to the social issues that I actually like, and this blend of genre and social irresponsibility, because there's always that idea with cinema that cinema needs to be socially responsible and all that, and the whole idea with this is we can be socially irresponsible, and it's completely irresponsible, and I kind of like that. That doesn't mean that that's what I want to do, but I kind of like this this continuation of the punk attitude that art owes you nothing, that films owe you nothing, and that they don't have to be responsible for you. They can be responsible. This is as irresponsible as it gets. In fact, I think it kind of created quite a lot of controversy at the time. So yes, John, find it. Let me know what you think. I hope you love it. Maybe you won't. I think it had a UK release called Satan. So that's possible to find. Next. For some British cinema, fairly obvious this one. I think, again, a little bit like Get Carter, I think you can't really talk about British revenge movies without really mentioning this one. Funnily enough, I did an interview with James Plum last week, which is going to be on tomorrow, and I was talking about Derelict, and I said Derelict would be a revenge movie. It would be a mix of a revenge movie and a Shane Meadow movie. And James was like, yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of Dead Man's Shoes. And yeah, it is. But the reason I never thought about it that way is because I actually always thought of it as a kind of a haunting movie. I know it's bizarre, but so I decided to give it another watch the other night, and I maintain it. I think for me, it's more of a haunted horror film than it is a revenge film. I mean, clearly it's a revenge film. That's what the film is about. But what I find really interesting is that kind of ghostly presence. No spoiler, but Paddy himself is very much a haunting presence in this. Coming back to haunt people with his revenge. But I think the reason that I never even connected the fact that Shane Meadow had made a revenge movie is because I always kind of saw it as a ghost movie. And it's very strange, but that's the truth. A socially realist ghost movie for me. Yeah. And having rewatched it recently, I think it's gorgeous. What I love about it is that kind of semi-improvised thing that they have going on, because it gives you some amazing performances. It feels real. You feel connected to it. There's that scene where they're tripping on acid. It is so good. So good. Again, for my actors, that would be the film that I would go to them and I would say, look, watch this. If we can reach even a tenth of the quality of the acting on this, I think we'll be made, because everyone is top notch. And in fact, for my money, I don't think they've ever been any better than in this, any of them. So, including Shane Meadow for me. Sorry if there are Shane Meadows fan, but yeah, for me that's his best. I would say that Derelict. So the reason as well I didn't really necessarily connect this one with Derelict when we did that interview is because I think Derelict adopts the form of the film noir, whereas this adopts the form of the social realist drama, very British, kind of very British thing going. Whereas with Derelict, there's a wider, I think maybe a wider mix of influence, which isn't necessarily better. By the way, it's hard to do better than this. Exceptional film, absolutely. I actually discovered this film because of you. When I moved to this country, I had no idea this film existed, and you kept talking about it, and I happened to go to Asda one day. It was £4, and so I bought the DVD and I watched it, and I was blown away. It is, it's one of those. I think you have to fall in love with this movie. It's kind of gone under the radar the last few years. I don't know why, but absolutely brilliant. I had a discussion with Corin about this. I was talking about Shane Meadows and how, for me, what made him exceptional. And I kind of disconnected with This Is England for me. Is what I liked is how he extracted some kind of shocking stories out of everyday life, and then his cinema kind of became the opposite of that, which is it stopped being a kind of about everyday life, and it became more about, in my opinion, just for me, with This Is England, it became less about normal everyday character. I couldn't relate as much to it, because it became also about time periods, and which in a way maybe might be more personal to him. I don't know. But for me, not having grown up in Britain, what I love about this is that it's immediately relatable. Like, I didn't have to have lived in Britain to recognize some of the people that lived in my street in this, which was really interesting. All of a sudden, you're looking at the most realistic haunting film. Yeah, I agree. I think everybody should see that. And again, yeah, when you're talking about influences, you're not saying, oh yeah, we're going to do Dead Man's Shoes, it's going to be as awesome as Dead Man's Shoes. That's not at all what we're saying, right? But what we're saying is, if we had the capacity, and if we were lucky enough to be able to realize our film to the fullest, if we could get to even a fraction of the quality of this, in terms of acting, in terms of writing, in terms of the atmosphere, yeah, I would be happy. This is an amazing movie. This one. So this isn't so much a film. It's the Peter Jackson collection. It's his 3 early movies. So Bad Taste, Meet the Feebles, and Brain Dead uncut. Still the only uncut release to this day. I think there's an American Blu-ray, but cut. So for Brain Dead, that's a bit. I think it's only 30 seconds, but if you think about it, I used to work in a DVD shop, and my boss then was an asshole. If you're watching this, you are an asshole. But he always used to say that if you shut your eyes for 30 seconds, you realize how much you miss, and it's true. 30 seconds is actually quite a lot of time to cut out of a film. But anyway, it's not so much that these are an influence on Derelict, but it's that Peter Jackson is an influence overall for me. I think there is no director that influenced me more than Peter Jackson. Not necessarily in the way that he makes films. I think Peter Jackson very much makes films the way that Peter Jackson makes films. You don't have to love it, but it's a fact. But what I love about Peter Jackson is he started making tiny films like Bad Taste, which took him like 2 or 3 years to finish, where he would cook everything in his mother's oven. He would make fake guns, and he would make fake alien heads, and that to me was always like that kind of, I think that defined my idea of how to make films. I often think, what happened if I ever made it? Would I want to make a massive budget movie? And I don't know if I would. I think I love about cinema. I kind of love DIY cinema for me, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think these days the idea of DIY comes loaded with this sort of badly made, badly recorded, badly shot thing, and I don't think it has to be. I think you can do super high quality, inventive stuff with DIY. Do it yourself. That's probably my only pretension, is I think I've reached a stage where, with my skills in terms of filming and editing and all that, where I can deliver a high quality product on not too much money, and do something interesting with it. And Peter Jackson, I think that there's always ever going to be just one Peter Jackson. And a lot of people say Sam Raimi as well, and I absolutely adore Sam Raimi, but I think there's a huge difference. I think and also because there's kind of a cultural uniqueness to Peter Jackson. Now, Sam Raimi, I adore Sam Raimi again, but he's an American filmmaker, whereas Peter Jackson, New Zealand, all of a sudden you get that weird tone, even the accents and the settings, locations, it's different. All of a sudden it hits differently. It's got a different image quality. It's got a different sound quality. It's and over the top, definitely. Which is funny because I'm gonna settle a score here, but I also love The Hobbit. Yes, I've said it. I love The Hobbit. Not as much as I love Lord of the Rings. Not as much as I love other Peter Jackson film. But I do love The Hobbit, and it always makes me laugh when people kind of shit on The Hobbit as if it wasn't over the top like every other Peter Jackson film. That's literally what defined Peter Jackson from his first film. This guy always put everything on the screen. Sometimes it doesn't work. And I'm not saying The Hobbit works 100%, but I'm saying that when it does work, it fucking works, right? And for me, yeah, that's always what made Peter Jackson over the top. He was always over the top. Even when he made drama, he was over the top. Even when he made Lord of the Rings, he was over the top, right? I mean, Lord of the Rings is a masterpiece, probably my favorite trilogy of all time, but it's over the top. It's a project that you wouldn't even at the time dream to bring to a studio. It was too much. It was too much of everything. Too much running time, too much fantasy, too much everything. Yeah, exactly, John. I actually loved The Hobbit, especially the extended version. And for me, I don't see how you can love the cinema of Peter Jackson and not love The Hobbit, honestly. That's just me personally. I get how you could love The Lord of the Rings and not love the rest of Peter Jackson's filmography, but I think if you love Peter Jackson and his excess, everything he does is excessive. Sometimes it does not work for me, like The Lovely Bones. Nah, not for me. It's excessively whiny, excessively gooey, but it's excessive. That the excess is what defines Peter Jackson's film. I mean, look, even when he made this fucking Beatles documentary, I'm not a fan of the Beatles, but you gotta respect the guy who's gonna make a 12 hours documentary where you just hang out with the Beatles. Who does that? You know, that's what I love about Peter Jackson. That and the fact that he rised from absolutely nowhere onto the scene, made a film with his friends in his garden on the weekends, and actually came up and got it distributed worldwide. It became a cult classic, and then every subsequent film that he made him, you know, a bigger, more important director. I would have loved to have seen his version of Nightmare on Elm Street, by the way. That would have been absolutely, I guarantee that would have been amazing. In a way, I'm glad he didn't make it, because if he had made it, his career would have been different, and I wouldn't change a thing. I think, you know, someone who offered us trilogy like Lord of the Rings, I wouldn't change a thing about it. But yeah, Peter Jackson, not necessarily a direct influence on Derelict as such, but a major influence on my philosophy and how I operate and why I do things the way I do. I've always admired the hell out of him, respected the hell out of him, what he achieved, where he came from, and what he's done since, essentially. So yes, Peter Jackson, absolutely essential for me. Now the opposite on the spectrum of my influences from Peter Jackson is Takeshi Kitano, Hanabi. Or I could have chosen any of his films. Hanabi particularly because it's also kind of a revenge movie in a very convoluted, weird way. It is about revenge. It's also a film that is constructed entirely around the relationship of two characters who go on a journey together. And for me, that was very important for Derelict, that these characters felt like they are actually going on an epic journey together. And there's a sense of stillness in this as well that I love, which I very much wanted for Derelict. I think Kitano is a master of the still shots and the way he composes them, the confidence you need to keep a shot going for that long, that doesn't move, and he's just relying entirely on the composition and the beauty of what's in the frame. How he tells a story like that, like a painter, which is really interesting. A part of the reason I picked this film is because it's about himself, in a sense. Every character is kind of a part of himself, and one of the characters is a wannabe painter who's in a wheelchair. He's crippled, and he learns to, not quite, but you could sum it up as he kind of learns to find another appreciation for life through his painting. And it's kind of it's a very interesting vision that Kitano has of the art, and his own because they're his own paintings ultimately that he films. So it's kind of he builds an interesting relationship between his idea of painting and then his idea of using the camera in a similar fashion. He's a very painterly filmmaker. You could literally take one of his shots in this and frame it, and it would look like the most beautiful painting. You could take it out of the film, and each frame is a painting. So it's a wonderful film. It's very violent. That's the other thing I like. This kind of there is this kind of romantic nature to it with characters. You know, it's all about love and doing the right thing for the people that you love, and sacrifice, and also suicide and death. But the explosions of violence are just traumatizing, and they are traumatizing because you genuinely care about what happens to these people. I also love the main character in this, is kind of internal struggle. It's all about quietness. It's not necessarily about expressing the rage or the sadness or the anger. It's all about living it inside him, and it's that kind of minimalist approach to acting, and it's masterful, because you never don't understand what he's actually going through, but there's very little going on in his face, in a way, right? He's never going over the top. There's never any explosion of sentimentality. It's just a very subtle, minimalistic approach to acting, and it's all about internalizing, and for the audience to connect what's happening on the screen with the way that he might be feeling. And I love that. I love that idea, and that's very much what I wanted for Abigail. A kind of quiet internal struggle, which Michael Mackenzie helped immensely with it. You know, because one of the things that he added to the screenplay is he did not want Abigail to cry at all. I had her crying at several points in the film, and Michael was like, I think not. We need to not have a cry until the very end, where she finally gets in touch with her actual emotions. So yes, if you have not seen that, that is a fantastic film. It is brutal, but it's also beautiful and absolutely heartbreaking. I absolutely adore this film. But then that could have been any kind of film up to Zatoichi, I think. After that, I kind of disconnected, but from Violent Cop to Zatoichi, I think there is nothing to throw away with Kitano, whether it's Jugatsu or Kikujiro, which is also absolutely magnificent. I think I could watch any of these films and be influenced and be inspired by it, because they are wonderful. Got a few more, not that many. This one is going to be interesting. John, if you're still watching, this one might be for you. Schizophrenia, also known as angst. Gerald Cargill, or whatever you pronounce his name, I don't know. Okay, this one is for knowing audiences only. It's a hard watch. In fact, I don't even think I've watched this Blu-ray. I must have seen this film 3 or 4 times, a couple of times on TV in France, and then I had a VHS of it that my neighbor lent to me, and yeah, this is a traumatizing film. What I absolutely love about it, again, is the grimness of it. It's so realistic, and what I really wanted in Derelict is for us to share the psyche of someone who's about to commit something horrible. This film commits to that with a bang. Like it's literally a film about point of view. So you share his point of view only. He's a serial murderer who's schizophrenic, I believe, and you only share his point of view on things, and it becomes very distorted, very brutal, very violent. You never go into the victim's point of view, so you're only invited to share his views on things. You're only invited to share his perception of things. So everything becomes very disturbing because of that, because you don't have a way out, right? This is what I love about this. It's not a film that I would watch easily. It's not something that I would watch every day. But what I love about it is the absolute lack of way out for the audience. You share into that disturbed mind, and you have no choice. You don't have an exit. You can't you can't feel for the victims because you only see them through his point of view. You can only feel for him, whatever that feeling is. That's it. And this kind of thing is what I wanted from the second part, from the second timeline of Derelict, is that we share into Matt and Ewan's daily life, and it doesn't really matter how you feel about them, but you're invited to share with them, and they will go to some fairly extreme to commit some fairly extreme things, but so will Abby. And so that kind of idea of sharing this kind of disturbed point of view and not being able to separate entirely from it, and actually being forced to feel compassion for someone who's disturbed, is something that but it's having said that, I don't recommend it if you're sensitive. This is a very, very violent film. It contains all sorts of irredeemable acts, murder and necrophilia, and yeah, it's nasty. It's as nasty as it gets. Don't hate Matt is fragile. Exactly, but that's the point, right, Mike? Is that, and I think this is what's disturbing about this, is it doesn't. I mean, right, like I said, I haven't seen it in a while, but I remember there are parts where you kind of feel that he himself is kind of a victim, of himself, of his own mental condition. The back of the Blu-ray says, "Warning: scenes from this film can be shocking to some audiences, including adults." Yeah, this one recommended, but the directing is astonishing. I will say that for it. The angles, the realism of it, it kind of gets. I think what I love as well with it is that it kind of gets. Visually, it kind of goes into full blown genre, but the visual code of the genre, kind of the expression of his sick mind, of his sick disturbed mind. So you get some very interesting way that he films the violence and all that. It's not overly gory, I wouldn't say, but it's very violent, very disturbing. Yeah. So John, if you haven't seen that one, Craig, you guys, if it's not for you, then I don't know who it's for. It's definitely not for everybody, but this one, yeah. That's going to be weirdly probably one of the more mainstream film, but surprisingly it's an influence on Derelict, and it's Christine. The reason why Christine is, first of all, John Carpenter, much like Peter Jackson, somebody I very much admire. I could have taken any of his films, but the reason I chose Christine is because it's about a malevolent influence in an innocent teen's life, essentially, which is pretty much what Derelict ended up being about. So if you remove the fantasy element from Derelict, I suppose you could associate it with Christine without too much of a stretch, actually, because that's essentially what Christine is about. Now, is it going to feel like Christine? No, of course not. This is very much a pure John Carpenter genre film. Actually, for me, one of my favorites of his. I'm not sure why. It's probably not his best, but I absolutely love it. Recently, we saw Halloween Ends took some inspiration from this, more or less successfully. Let's put it that way. But yes, so this is. I don't need to talk hours about this. I think most people have seen this, but this is definitely a major influence on Derelict in a weird, convoluted way, but still. What else have we got? Impossible to talk about female revenge films and not talk about this. Female Prisoner, Scorpion, the complete collection. I would stick with 1 and 2 for me. After that, I think it becomes a lot more exploitative. But the artistry in this, the kind of surreal floating atmosphere, and um, for me the Japanese exploitation cinema is on par with Italian. They both, funnily enough, for me represent the best of exploitation cinema for the same reasons, which is very strange, is that they're always fairly exploitative, but they never forget about artistry, and that's what I absolutely love about this. As art films, they are just undeniable. They are so beautifully shot, inventive, crazy. They have no narrative limits. They will go into anything and everything and do it with absolute crass and class at the same time, which I adore. The kind of the lead character as well, her internal violence and the way that she approaches the whole thing of taking revenge on those who caused her harm. I think it's that stylistic approach I really liked. I'm not necessarily, although I've spoken a lot about social realism and all that, I'm not necessarily an advocate that films should be realistic. I think their only kind of responsibility towards that is a responsibility towards their own internal logic in a way, and this works as such. I can't get it straight. It's really annoying me. Very bizarre. Anybody here seen these? Be good to know. Well, if you haven't, I would recommend them. You know, the first two for me. After that, yeah, if you're curious. But the first two, the second one particularly, especially with that kind of mood, with that music, you know, that guitar riff that keeps popping in, and yeah, the pure artistry, the insertion of fantasy in there as well was a very important key aspect of Derelict. As Matt kind of goes deeper into his regret and all that, we have fantasy elements, and the way that they play those fantasy elements, I think you would believe that you're into a 50s, 60s Japanese fantasy movie, you know, with ghostly appearances and Shakespearean witches and all sorts of stuff like that. And I love the freedom of tone of these films. They kind of go into everything that they fancy at any time. So yeah, well, I think John, you'd probably like these. You know, they've got that genuine freedom of tone. Like they change from scene to scene. Extreme violence as well. It's extremely dark, extremely violent. But yeah, it's so you go from one thing to another in the space of a scene. Sometimes, you know, you get very violent abuse from prison guards, and then it goes into some fantasy flashbacks and fantasy elements of seeing spirits and stuff like that. And it's yeah, I mean, it's and it never feels patchworky, which is the other thing. It's kind of coherent all the way through, at least for the first two. After that, I mean, honestly, might be worth a look, but yeah, I would recommend these. And Abigail's character is obviously an heir to the main character in this. I don't think, honestly, for me anyway, with the way that I work, I don't think you can genuinely go into the idea of female vengeance and not talk about female prisoner Scorpion. Yeah, and again, I discovered these yeah, it is a nice looking box monkey. And again, I discovered these when I was kind of in my teenage years. Yes, John, I mean, you are correct. Asian stuff looks like a huge rabbit hole. I'm still down the Italian rabbit hole. You're right. But what I'm saying is they're very similar rabbit holes in a strange way, with different obsessions and different, I guess, different relations to sex and violence, but kind of similar in the way that yes, so they are crowd pleasers, but at the same time they have no problem being artistically risky or bizarre or daring, subversive. All of this, especially, I mean, with these, particularly with the relations to nudity in Japan and how it's still problematic in Japan, and when you see how far they went with this from the very opening scene, yeah, it's kind of subversive, and I like this idea of making subversive and free cinema. and this is it. You know, I think you could definitely see the influence of the French New Wave on this. So what's interesting is you can see the influence of the French New Wave, but you can also see a whole legacy of the way that the Japanese approach violence, their relation to sexuality and violence, the Asian influence. What's interesting, for example, in a lot of Asian cinemas, they have less of a problem with violence than they do with sexuality. So that creates a different balance from the Italian stuff, but it's that thing of doing exploitation that isn't worried about also being arty, and I love that. I think that's something that's slowly getting lost. We kind of are stuck in these days. We kind of stuck in a kind of homage to exploitation, but it's always the same vibe of exploitation. It's the American grindhouse and all that, and it kind of leaves out the artistry for me. And what I love in these is they're extreme, they're violent, they're subversive, they're also absolutely stunning to look at. They sound beautiful, they look beautiful. There's some incredible narrative concepts, incredible narrative ideas. Yeah, totally worth it. These are the films I would, if I could, if I had an ounce of the talent of the people that made this, these are the films that I would aspire to make. Not a lot more, a few more. Carry on with a few Asian things. Bittersweet Life. Now this is a very important film for me. It came out basically at the height of the Korean New Wave, just following Old Boy and all that stuff, and I was absolutely blown away by it. And what I love particularly about it, that I would like for Derelict, is the mix of stylized violence, and at the same time some of it comes across as quite ridiculous and pathetic. So it's the sort of thing where it's going to be incredibly brutal, but also someone might get hit in the head and just go like, and everything is suspended for a second while they look at the blood, and it creates that kind of weird distended time frame. And I was quite keen for the violence in that's brilliant. Yeah, I love the Korean stuff as well. I'm jealous of you that you saw that in the cinema, because I only saw it the first time on DVD. Since then this is a German Blu-ray. But I love that kind of mix of like sudden explosion of violent comedy in a way, where you don't really ever know which foot you're supposed to stand on, because you never know if it's going to absolutely shake you to your core or make you explode with laughter, you know. And obviously it's extremely stylized. This is the other thing, is I think it's a stunning film to look at. It's absolutely beautiful. It's got elements of film noir again, massively, which actually you don't find that much on in Asian films, I suppose. The influences are just simply a little bit different. But this one is kind of a modern noir, which is what Derelict is as well. And the stylization, the way that it goes into the modern noir, the idea of vengeance, again, everything is contained in that movie. Of course, there are differences. First of all, we don't have the budget that this film has. Definitely not. It's also, in a way, overly stylized. We want to keep that. Kind of social, realistic thing with Derelict. But as far as this whole construction of vengeance, the internal life of the character. What I love about this as well is that it's all again internalized. I love the scene where she's playing the cello and he's listening to her. He's closing his eyes, and you can literally guess his entire internal monologue. John Woo, Hong Kong. I think also a lot of it is it comes from the martial arts culture and all that stuff. Yeah, absolutely. John Woo. Yeah, well, John Woo is one of those who I think he had a lot of American influences. He quotes the Wizard of Oz as being one of his main influences. So, and yeah, I think, but I think you're right. Yeah, there's definitely a John Woo vibe to it. But I think also kind of in a way, kind of all these British and American gangster films, but done in an extremely A Better Tomorrow, definitely, absolutely. I mean, even the poster is very similar to A Better Tomorrow. But I think the thing with Koreans and Hong Kong in a way is, but the Koreans have a sense of irony that I didn't find so much in the John Woo stuff, which was very melodramatic, and I absolutely adore the John Woo stuff. A Bullet to the Head's got that sense of bullet in the head, bullet in the head. Bullet to the Head is the Stallone film. Don't watch that one. There's that sense of irony, I think, where there is a kind of distance to everything that is always kind of soaked in the idea that everything is all a little bit ridiculous. That's what I was saying. You know, it doesn't deny the drama, but there are moments where it is designed to make you go, oh, this is it gets weird. And I think for our kind of Occidental sensibilities, there are some stuff that can definitely kind of be jarring in the way that they mix blend the genres, blend the tones. Particularly with Korean cinema is this shift in tone. Sometimes one scene to another, sometimes in the same scene, you know, this sense of sarcasm, this kind of dark humor that goes through everything. Like later, Kim Ji-woon also made I Saw the Devil. Again, super violent, super stylish, but funny, incredibly darkly funny, you know. So, yeah, that's. But that's always one that I keep in mind on everything. I remember when we did Dirt, that's the one I had in mind. I showed the DOP some of that because I thought, yes, this is what you need to aspire to. The choreography of the violence, the way that it works, the stylization, the acting, the music. You know, Mikael Sanchez, multiple times I sent him Korean scores to work from so that he would get that kind of weird tone. As for the Devil, masterwork, awesome film. Yeah, I love it. I love Kim Ji-woon though. A lot of people don't. They kind of see him as a subpart John Wook. For me, completely different things. I also love The Foul King, which is another one of his that is. It's just so brilliant because it's kind of a wrestling comedy, The Falcon, and it's hilariously funny. There's one of my favorite Song Kang-ho performances in it. He's tragic but funny at the same time, and it's soaked in class, social class wars thing. Whereas this guy who not this film, The Falcon. This guy kind of learns wrestling because he's being oppressed by his boss in a bank, and he wants to be a professional wrestler. That's his dream. And the film is hilarious. It's also profoundly tragic, but that's what I love. It goes from one thing to another, like that sometimes. Yeah, right, Todd. Who doesn't love this movie? Seriously, everybody should love this movie. Yeah. It was one of my early Korean discoveries and still one of my favorite. That and Memories of Murder, Old Boy, Lady Vengeance, Golden Age. Honestly, this is, yeah. Well, yeah, so for Derelict, I'm hoping we can even kind of reach a little bit of that. I had this idea I played with for a while where, obviously I'm not going to do it, that's why I'm talking about it, but I wanted to end Derelict the same way that this movie ends, where you get that very ambiguous shot where he's staring in the window, he's looking at the city skyline, and you don't know if what you just saw, the hour and 40 minutes that you just saw is all fantasy, if he's been thinking about it, if it's just what he's been thinking about, the space of a coffee, if he's making a decision looking at his window, or if it's just the kind of last flash of happiness that he has before he actually dies. I love this kind of ambiguous endings. Kim Ji-woon is the specialist of that. The Falcon ends in also a very ambiguous, weird way. And that was just a thing that's kind of inspiring with Kim Ji-woon for me. I wanted Derelict to end in an almost unsatisfying way, like kind of ends and you go and I love that undecisiveness because, well, not everything gets tied in a knot in a tidy little bow all the time, you know. And I love that. I love this kind of uncertainty that comes out of the end of some of his films. So this one, if you haven't seen it, fantastic movie. 6 more. Right. This film. Alright, so this film, I can't remember the original title. It's a Spanish film with Antonio de la Torre. And what I absolutely love about it is that idea of it's about revenge. It's about a guy who decides to take revenge on the people who hurt him and hurt his loved one. But he waits 8 years, and he takes his time, and he gets to know the culprits, and he gets into a relationship with them, and it creates a very unsettling mood to it, where the revenge is kind of delayed, and obviously with delayed revenge, what happens is that you have no choice but to make it very cold, because the heat of the loss and the anger is passing with the years. So what we did with Derelict is between the time of what happens and the time Abigail takes her revenge, 10 years have passed, and so she's had to live with the revenge in her heart, essentially, with the idea of revenge. The difference is she can't do it for reasons that you'll have to find out, but she can't do it. She's unable to do it until 10 years later, where she finally decides to take the steps to take her revenge. I absolutely love that idea. The film itself, I think, is good. It's not the best film on this pile, but I thought it was actually very interesting. And obviously Antonio de la Torre, probably my favorite current Spanish actor, is absolutely fantastic. He was brilliant in El Reino. Brilliant film if you haven't seen El Reino, actually. The Spanish cinema. It's been a couple of years now that I haven't seen something that blew me away, but it's still a very healthy industry. The films of Alex de la Iglesia and so I mean they do some amazing stuff. I've got another one here actually, which is very interesting. Spanish films. We'll get them out of the way. Box 507. Again, is this idea of revenge. These are both revenge movies made in Spain. Oh, actually, this one's Argentinian, I think. I believe. No, it's Canal Plus España, so it's Spanish. And so it's that idea of revenge. In this one, it's about a guy who, after a bank robbery, discovers that what he thought was an accidental death was actually a criminal death, and he decides to take revenge on the people who caused the death of his, I think it's his daughter. And it goes very far. And what I love is this, with both of these, is this idea of normal people going into revenge. You know, what a lot of genre films tend to do is revenge is reserved for people that are out of the ordinary, you know, ex-SAS and people who have extraordinary skills. And I love this idea that no, revenge is it can be a very human, everyday life kind of thing. And with both of these films, I think this guy's a banker, this guy's just like I can't even remember his job in the film, but normal everyday people taking things into their own hands. They don't. Yes, right. So this one, good luck to find this one, you know, and this one actually, physical media. Yeah, you know, find these on God knows where. You know, good luck. Still the DVD of this one, you know, like it's an old DVD. Yeah. So recommend these immensely for this kind of realistic vengeance idea, and the delayed vengeance as well. I like both. I think both ideas are kind of interesting for me, because they create a different dynamic with the idea of revenge, where all of a sudden you get normal everyday people. They don't necessarily know what they're doing. They don't necessarily know guns. They don't necessarily know knives. They haven't necessarily killed somebody before. All of a sudden, not only do they have to take the decision to kill someone, but it's also that delay, so they've had time to think about it. They've had time to really kind of stew over it, and so it creates some internal struggles, which again links to that idea of having an internal dialogue with your characters. So the characters are, they live their lives inside rather than having an external plot always forcing them to express the way that they feel. It's that delay, that thinking, that living inside, and that idea that revenge is a thing that consumes people from the inside, and the longer that it takes, the more they become consumed by it. And the way that we made this work with Abigail is she has family members that stand on different corners of the problem, and she goes to them, and they become a kind of crystallization over different options, and then the decision that she has to make becomes them. It doesn't mean they're not fleshed out characters, they are fleshed out characters, but they become a kind of representation of her internal struggle. That means that you don't have to get her to express her internal struggles all the time, which goes back to this thing we talked with Michael Mackenzie, where she doesn't have to be crying all the time, for example. We know how she feels. We know how she feels, she doesn't have to keep saying it. That was very important to me. One that, the next one, John, you're going to love this. I know you are. Rabbit Dogs. Mario Bava's Rabbit Dogs. How can I put this? I know Bava is known for a lot of stylish horror, gothic horror, his use of color, his use of black and white, but also, you know. This though, it's kind of an array into, it's kind of a Bava's response to the kind of Polizioteschi and you know, violent crime dramas that came up from Umberto Lenzi and all these people, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. It's got that repetitive score over it all the time, and it's kind of becomes hypnotic. And what I love about it, again, is the absolutely grim nature of the crime. It's so grim. It's so bleak. It's unforgiving, and I was keen for Derelict to feel that way. And so far, everyone that's read the script says it's very harsh. It's very harsh, but then reality is, we took inspiration from reality with Derelict, and we wanted it to reflect this sense of, well, you know, reality is harsh. It's not necessarily an anti-genre film, but it's not a full genre film either, in the sense that we didn't want it to feel like there could be any sort of escaping from the very grim, bleak reality of the crime that's being committed while you watch, and you are completely unable to do anything about it. And this film feels very much that way as well. It's very stylish, obviously, very 70s. In fact, it might even be the 80s, to be honest. I don't even know which was the year. John, you might know. What was the year it was made? I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, brilliant film. Stunning score as well. Todd, have you seen that? I'm waiting for your answer. Anybody seen that? I think my wife's seen it, Sarah. We watched that together. Anyway, just a brilliant film. Again, anything you don't have a copy. Is that a hint, Todd? You want me to send you a copy? Is that what you're asking for? You're asking for a copy of this? Well, you can have my copy for how much are we looking to raise? £15,000. I'm joking, obviously. Okay. Yeah, it is a brilliant film. I don't know if I'd say it's a classic. I think most people who think of Bava, they don't necessarily think about this, which is weird. You know, they think the gothic, the castles, the red gels and the blue gels, and yeah, it's not free, Todd. I said 15 grand. 15 grand and it's yours. I will lick it for you and send it. That's worth a lot of money. Anyway, the grimness, the bleakness of this, And the pace, I absolutely love the pace. It just doesn't stop for breath, this one, and it's tense all the way through. Um, yeah, absolutely brilliant movie. 3 more. Can we guess what they are? That's very true. That's very true. I think this is what I meant when I said, you know, it's kind of his response to Umberto Lenzi and all these films. Bambi. Yeah, it is Bambi. How did you know? It's the bit where the mum gets killed. Yeah, it does feel like the film of a younger man. And by then, Bav had been in the industry for a very long time, and there was that whole generation of younger filmmakers that were doing very bleak, very violent films. You know, and it does feel like yeah, I would put it against any of these. For me, for my money, I would put it against any of these other films like of the same time that go into similar territory. Like I forgot the title. Almost Human, for example. You know. Yeah. So yeah. So have we guessed what the next one is? You're gonna like this, John. This one's for you. I was hoping you'd be on there. Arrivederci, amore, ciao. Absolutely stunning, shocking film. Again, what I absolutely love about this is it kind of starts like a traditional gangster film, the Italian way, and then progressively it turns into that kind of almost true crime, grim thing. But because of the way that it's constructed, you are invited to share into the coolness and the charm and the charisma of its main character, and then as he progressively starts to commit horrendous acts, I think you are kind of still cheering for him to the end, and it's a fairly, yes, it is the Soavi film, yeah. Have you seen it? So it's fairly yeah, so it gets fairly bleak, and I like that idea. What I wanted to do with Matt and Ewan is that you would follow them, you would like them, and the progression of their storyline would be such that by the end of it, you would feel torn about how you feel about them. It's particularly Matt. Ewan is a different business probably, but Matt was an interesting character for me. Ah, John, you have to see this. It's amazing. In fact, you know, I didn't. I've sold all my DVDs a few years back. It's one of the one I kept because there's still no Blu-ray, unfortunately, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's for me, along with probably Subura, probably the best gangster slash cop movie to come out of Italy the last 2 decades. Honestly, there hasn't been anything that even comes remotely close to this or Subura, including Romanzo Criminale and Gomorrah and all that. It's fine, but it's great even. But no, this is actual greatness. This and Subura by Sollima Jr. These are this is amazing and shockingly violent, and not all that remote. What's very interesting is that it's not all that remote from Soavi's horror films. It's actually, if you think about it, it shares a lot of his obsessions, but it's transferred into this sort of gangster world, and it plays on expectations because the way that it is built, it is literally a straight gangster movie up until halfway through the film, and then it changed into actually what I would qualify as a horror film. It's a genuine horror film. not defined as a horror film, but it's as horrific as it gets, and very, very dark, very brutal, very violent. And so when I said that Derelict was not going to be a horror film, it wasn't entirely true. I'm hoping that by the time the film is finished, a lot of our audiences feel like actually this is genuinely horrific. It's not a horror film, but if you were that way inclined, it could feel like actual horror. And so this film, yes, watch it, because worth it all the way. Last two. Who cares to guess? The Innocents. Beautiful, beautiful Gothic film. So yes, I said Derelict was not a horror film, but in a sense, I was keen to develop that relationship between Matt and Ewan as a kind of ghostly, evil influence. Not entirely evil in the sense that I didn't want it to be, ooh, look at the evil character, but in the sense that it's someone who's disappeared from Matt's life, and he comes back in, and all of a sudden it forces him into transforming into something else. And that idea is actually, it's a very Gothic idea, and I like toying with that. I like toying with genres, and I think it helps you create things that haven't necessarily been done a million times, because all of a sudden you have a weird mix of influences. You mix things that maybe people haven't mixed together before, and all of a sudden you get you get something that's interesting, because even though you are familiar with the elements, all the separate elements, the whole that they form isn't necessarily something that you've seen before. And I'm not saying we've managed it always, I'm saying this is what we aim for. Technically brilliant film, yeah, it is. It's creepy. There's very few horror films of that time that I still find creepy, including, for example, The Haunting. I love The Haunting, but I think it's lost its creepiness over the years. This one is creepy. I think it's this whole thing of ghosts in the windows, and I think the whole thing was, the dark, the candles, the Gothic setting, and all that. It's remains genuinely spooky, and it remains spooky because I think the fantasy isn't over the top. It still remains kind of ambiguous. It's a very ambiguous movie, and it's very psychological. Yes. Oh yeah. Absolutely, John. Yeah. Yes. Split diopter in there. Yeah. And so on Derelict, yeah, a little bit of Gothic, a little bit of Gothicness. It's always a good thing. And that brings me to our second writer, Kat Ellinger, who's a specialist of Gothic, film historian and writer, Kat Ellinger. And my idea was that she would probably enjoy those Gothic elements, those Gothic aspects, and get to it, and probably deepen them and make them even better. But this whole corrupting influence of the Innocents, yes, it's called the Innocents, for a reason. This whole corrupting influence from something that belongs to another timeline, to a past, in a sense. That, to me, that's interesting. And it does the link with Dead Man's Shoes. That's the reason I always kind of saw Dead Man's Shoes as a British ghost story, in a sense, which is why I didn't even connect the dots with the Revenge movie when I did this interview with James Plum, because that's what it's about. It's about the past. It's a literal haunting of the past. I think what I love about this is that it kind of figured it all out on the mythology of ghosts, and And when you see it today, when you see things like, okay, I'm going to be a bitch now, but when you see today stuff done by, like, for example, Mike Flanagan, it's fine. I have no problem with it as such. But, you know, it's just rehashing the same old thing that they'd already figured out then. What are ghosts? You know, the literalization of ghosts, this whole, the past coming to possess people or corrupt them, which is brilliant. So, Jack, if you've not seen this, this is an actual masterpiece for me. And one last film. Henry. Portrait of a Serial Killer. Again, much like Angst, what I particularly love about this one is how unapologetic it is in getting you to share the point of view of what's supposed to be Henry Lee Lucas. It's oppressive, it's grim, it's realistic, it's carried by a performance by Michael Rooker, which I think is still his best. And it's unforgiving. I think for me, that is true horror. It's something that will take you to territories you might not necessarily want to look, but at the same time, it invites you in such a way to look into it. It invites you to share a point of view that you might not have shared. That's what makes it disturbing. It's not about how cool the murders are. It's not about how cool the kills are. It can be, that's fun, no problem. But it's about sharing a disturbed point of view. Cinema is very much about point of view, by the way. And so what we wanted to do with Derelict is for you to share Matt and Ewan's point of view. And then once you've done that, we invite you to share Abby's point of view again. Now the thing with that is that because you've shared Matt and Ewan's point of view, you've shared this story, is that you might not feel as clearly about Abigail's revenge as you would think you would. Because the act that they commit is horrendous. Yeah, Jack, I mean, if you've never seen this, this is as grim as it gets, mate. It's I've also got the Arrow 4K, but for some reason I decided to pick that one of the shelves. Don't know why. Yeah. So yeah, John McNaughton never actually did anything that even remotely comes to the level that he reached with this movie. It's incredibly realistic. It's heartbreaking. It's shocking. And every time at the moment with that Dahmer show on Netflix, every time someone posts on how brutal it is, and I just want to throw the Henry Blu-ray at them and go, yeah, watch this. This is the ancestor of all this, and it's in my mind it's better. It's more raw. Being shot on film as well brings it that kind of grainy, dirty quality that only films of that time have. And while we're not after trying to emulate this look, it's always aesthetically at the back of my mind that this kind of dirty look made things a little grimmer. You know, this is a reflection I had, for example, when we watched when it came out, we watched a Serbian film, because I was trying to watch films that are a bit controversial anyway. But for me, it looked way too polished. It meant that some of the stuff that I was looking at a kind of strange distance, and that's fine if that's what you want to do. If you want to create a strange distance, that's fine. This has no distance. This is you, a disturbed mind, and his actions. And it does not put a distance between you and the disturbed mind, which to some extent I think Dahmer does, because Dahmer puts itself, the show writers, the showrunner put themselves into, obviously, and I understand why, and I enjoyed it, but they always put themselves in a position of being able to judge, whereas this doesn't. That's what makes it more disturbing. And in a little bit in the same way that I was talking about Harry Brown and how it gives up its kind of political status halfway, which means that the conversation then doesn't really exist as such, and you end up with some counter meaningful stuff in your film, in what you're trying to say. Well, this doesn't. This does not compromise. And so, because it doesn't compromise, you can have an honest conversation about it. You can have an honest conversation about the idea of empathy, the idea of identification, and the idea of what a disturbed mind actually brings to a screen, and what it brings to you. I think the whole idea, and you can see here on the poster that they did with with this image of the fractured mind. Essentially, it's a reflection. Well, it's a reflection of you, essentially, as a viewer. And that's what I was keen to, just to simplify, but that's what I was keen to get to with Derelict as well, is for identifications and empathy to be split, and not for the audience to be too comfortable with anything that's happening on the screen and question where their loyalty is. Have we succeeded? I don't know. You'll tell me when you see the film. But yes, this film, again, much like Angst, not something I can watch every 5 minutes. It's very disturbing, very gory as well. There's a lot of sexual violence, but it's it's what I like about it, that I don't find in a lot of stuff, including stuff done about serial killers today, is it's morally ambiguous, complex, difficult. So there you go. That's it. An hour and 45 minutes, not bad. 47 comments. You guys, thank you for following this. I will stay on it for 5 more minutes. If you have any questions about any of what I just said, this is your time. Release Pete's speech, yes, we will. But the deal was we had to reach our full amount, and at the moment, doesn't look like we are. Would like last Avengers Endgame as a revenge film. So Joe, you just lost your job. So well done. Goodbye. No, I don't know. You know what? I've only seen it once. Sure, if you want it to be a revenge film. I don't think the internet needs me to talk about Avengers Endgame. But maybe Mike can talk about it in his next in his live. I'm joking, Joe. You have not lost your job. You will never lose your job. Not with us, anyway. Once is too much. Is that Henry? John. Yeah, don't say the M word. Yeah, are you trying to get me banned from Facebook? Is that what's happening? You're trying to get me to be unfriended by a lot of my friends. So yes, so we are still, so after an hour and 47 minutes, I can inform we are still looking to raise money for Derelict. So if you guys are in a position to help with this, anybody watching this in a position to help with this, no amount is too small. We love for you to share, we love for you to promote it. We are still looking to raise pretty much half of our budget, so we're not there yet. We only have 7 days left, so now is the time to, you know, to really push for it. The way that crowdfundings work is they get a lot of their money the last week or the first week, so you get that middle slump which we've been stuck into for a long time. Yeah, it would be good if we could get there. For us, that would be amazing, you know. So just to summarize, so in reverse order, films we talked about. In the meantime, while I do this, if you have questions, now's your time. Henry, Portraits of a Serial Killer. Very harsh film, not for everybody. Brilliant performance, Michael Rooker. Very shocking movie, but true horror for me. Innocent, creepy movie, gothic, corrupting influences, beautiful setting, gorgeous black and white cinematography is stunning, and it's still one of the rare films from that era which I still find incredibly creepy. Arrivederci, Amore Ciao, a kind of thriller gangster movie, but actually it's a horror film in disguise. It's grim, it's bleak, it's also absolutely beautiful, stylish. Probably one of the best Italian, one of my favorite Italian films of the last 2 decades. Why am I such a cutie? Jeans. You can't beat it. Half whatever, half French, half. No, it's only two halves. So thirds of things create this cute person with a nice beard. Rabbit dogs. Again, Bava. You cannot miss this. It's not the most famous Bava film. It's not even the most emblematic Bava film, but it is it's bleak and it's grim, and a major influence on Derelict. I'm particularly fascinated with films that delve into pathetic crimes. You know, because that's what Derelict is ultimately about. It's not cool. It's not badass. It's not. It's just kind of pathetic. Box 5 or 7, and the Spanish revenge movie. Perfect double bill with this one, another Spanish revenge movie. They kind of those two movies go hand in hand in the way that they delve into the whole everyday man going into revenge. Gets very violent. Gets very cool. Oh yeah, I mean that poster. Yeah, of course it's badass. The film is cool. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking about Derelict when I say not cool, not badass. This is a cool film. The 70s score and the cinematography and the yeah, it's unforgiving. It's a no mercy movie. A Bittersweet Life, for its take on the noir film, the stylishness, the internal struggle of the characters, where nothing is expressed in their lines or in their dialogue. It's all about quietness, and then that kind of weird blend of extreme stylized action and weird dark comedy violence. Yeah, stop it with the Marvel. Shh, who said that? Female prisoner Scorpion, the first two at least. Absolute freedom of tone. Works of art. Exploitative works of art, which is very interesting because a lot of critics would, or a lot of critics, not necessarily, but a lot of critics and people would love to pretend that the two are incompatible or even opposite, where actually, as a matter of fact, they don't have to be, and this proves it. It's completely free in its form, and it's crazy. It creates some crazy results. That's what you want. That's what you want from being an indie. What is the point of being an indie if you're going to make films that try to resemble studio movies? What's the point? No. That's the answer. Christine, no need for introduction. Again, this idea of a corrupting influence, in this one, a car, on a kind of innocent teenage mind, was played a big part in the way that we thought about Derelict. Angst. Can't recommend that one to everybody. It's kind of like Henry, but even more shocking. And I can't say that I will watch that one probably even less than I watch Henry. Will I rewatch it before Derelict? Probably. So what's your favorite line ever, Jack? Christina's my favorite line ever. So yes, I will probably rewatch that maybe before we redo Derelict for the realistic violence of the whole thing. This kind of sharing the disturbed mind. Shut your pie hole. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Although that's also in a so a lot of things. I don't think it's just in Christine, but that's okay, Jack. Angst. Not for everybody, but yeah. John, maybe you've seen that. Maybe not. But if you haven't, I don't know, maybe that's your thing. Annabelle, again, this kind of character-driven drama, poetically. I mean, it's. I like the poetry of it. That's something I always try and. Not that I'm a poet, by the way. I'm not. Kind of the opposite of that with my big fat fingers. But I love how he always finds poetry and artistry in even the most violent of situations, and not necessarily visually violent, though there's a lot of that, but also morally violent. You know, death and sacrifice, and he always finds the absolute painterly beauty of it and the poetry of it. And that's something I was quite keen that we tried to do with Derelict, even though it's a very harsh, hard-boiled kind of film noir. This kind of poetry that he goes into and the painterliness, if there's such a word, that's interesting for me for that reason, and also because anything by Kitano is worth a look up to Zatoichi. And they just look at these Spanish hands, massive fingers. You know, that's from my granddad. Wow. Yeah, big chunky fingers. Anabi. Chunky, indeed. Peter Jackson. Anything by Peter Jackson. It's a philosophical thing. You don't have to love the movies, but this is a guy who came from nothing, out of nowhere, out of a country that didn't do this kind of films, and he came up and he did that on his own, in his garden, with his mates, finding solutions to tell the story, scratching stuff on the film directly to create effects, you know, building fake guns, building fake heads. There's a sheep explosion in Bad Taste, which is just absolutely hilarious and absolutely brilliantly done. There's all sorts of effects that he figured out, camera moves. Yeah, this is genius. I'm sorry, but this is what every indie filmmaker should aspire to, is Peter Jackson. Dead Man's Shoes, the haunted revenge movie, I guess. But again, fantastic movie. A lot of brilliant acting in that. A lot of improvisation. Very raw, very brutal. Brilliant performance by Paddy. Shane Meadows' best film for me, hands down. Probably was A Room for Romeo Brass, who also has Paddy, and it's got another. That's another one I could have talked about actually, because it also has quite a shocking turn, which is brilliant. But yes, this brilliant film. Shaitan, for this crazy kind of irresponsible cinema, you know, but at the same time socially conscious thing that's happening there. The weird, disturbed youth French folk horror, with an absolutely unhinged performance by Vincent Cassel. Worth a look. Not everybody loves it, but definitely worth a look. Martin, George Romero, this kind of realistic venture into genre film. You can't beat it. Simple. You're obsessed with steelbooks, Mike. This one, which is a bit of a surprise to some of you, this diptych, that is thing in English, diptych. I don't know, diptych is a French word. So these two films that go hand in hand and that are shockingly brutal. You know, they don't look like it, but they are shockingly brutal. They're about revenge. They're about crime. Not in the way that you would think. They take place in a beautiful setting of Provence. It's sunny. It's the south of France. And it's about the everyday evil of men. And then the revenge of a woman. Brilliant. And not what you would expect. In fact, actually, you know what? We should do a rewatch soon. Harry Brown, torn about this one. Not the best film of the lot. I love the first hour. But there is that one scene in there with Sean Harris, which is just disturbing to the core. And that scene, not the film itself, but that scene was a big influence. And we discussed it a lot with Darren, my actor, who's going to play a very similar role to Sean Harris in that. The film itself, I've talked about it previously in the video. Interesting, not entirely successful for me. That's just me. A lot of people love it. That's great. But that scene, I would watch that scene on a loop. Lady Vengeance, this transition, the director's cut, not the cinema cut. Very rare cut actually. The only major difference is that it goes into black and white at the end of the film. It's brilliant. It changes the film altogether, which is very interesting. That was a very interesting thing to know for us for Derelict, because it allowed us to make a choice and know whether we could do that or not. And so that was a vital film in the way that we conceived Derelict artistically and visually and all that stuff. The normal cut's great as well, but the director's cut, yeah, this film. A lot of people would say it's not as good as Old Boy. Old Boy is a hard one to top. I think for me, it's equally as great as Old Boy. Probably more bizarre. La Haine, I talked about that so many times. I don't need to talk any more about it. I think we had a film club when I was in college, and that's one of the films I showed. And it spoke to the people that were there and saw it in a way that you wouldn't think such a culturally particular film would, but it does. I think this film will never get old. It will never date. It will never age. It will always be relevant. I think you can't have been born in France wanting to be a filmmaker and not take this film in consideration, at least. You don't have to love it, but you have to consider it. Le Vieux Fusil, hardcore revenge cinema. This, I mean, it's so affecting. So affecting. Beautifully shot, beautifully made. Philippe Noiret, in my mind, one of the greatest French actors of all time. He was absolutely beautiful in Cinema Paradiso. He is heartbreaking in this. Another film that I almost put on the pile was also Coup de Torchon, which is also brilliant, and another adaptation of a famous American writer that's then transferred into French colonies. So there's something really interesting there with the other film C'est Noir. But this is worth a look. It's sad. It's absolute sadness made film. It's brilliant. Série Noire, so as I was saying, French film noir adapted from Jim Thompson to a French setting. It's bleak. It's the end of the 70s in France. It's all very, very rainy, muddy, grey, beige, snowy, everyday crime. Yeah, absolutely stunning film. Not enough people in this country have seen this one. You can't miss it. It's brilliant. Ciao Pantin, again, very similar to Série Noire, with a stunning performance by Coluche, who was a French comedian, very funny guy, did a lot of comedies, but this is not a comedy. This is a kind of, again, film noir. It's a modern noir, I suppose, which takes place in Paris. Okay, interesting question. Top 3. Okay, let me finish this, and then top 3. I'll pick the top 3, Mike. Brilliant film. I recommend it. Bleak again. Get Carter. No need for an introduction. If you've not seen this, what are you doing with your life? See this. Top 3, Mike. Oh, that's hard. Okay, top 3 for me. This one, and oh, that's hard, dude. You can't do that. No, that's hard. Yeah, this one. Top 3, though it changes all the time. And a B. Get Carter. La Haine. Blue Ruin. Yes, Todd. You just reminded me about Blue Ruin, which I had forgotten, which is terrible. Yes, Blue Ruin. Absolutely. It should be on this pile. It isn't. Blue Ruin. Another brilliant revenge movie that was a major influence on Derelict. I was basically, the whole time I was writing the first draft, I was listening to the soundtrack. I rewatched the film. I actually rewatched it because I wanted to make sure we weren't actually doing exactly the same thing in a sense. You know, you're doing revenge is a subject that has been exploited quite a bit, and so we just wanted to make sure that we didn't exactly, you know, do the same, because we had that kind of same um, quiet, disturbed approach that is in Blue Ruin, and also that directness, and the kind of amateurishness to the revenge itself. And so I wanted to make sure that we weren't doing exactly the same thing. That's not a bad idea. I should do these more often as recommendations for films to watch. Not that anybody cares, other than Jack and John, and you've seen all of them. Mike's not going to watch any of those. It's like, fuck that. So, Desert Island Question. What is that, Jack? What's the Desert Island Question? Oh, God, YouTube channel. Don't have time for this. Oh, YouTube channel. I have a very nice voice. Thank you. Yeah, well, they fucking do. Yeah, well, I know that. You know, that's very frustrating. Let's not start on that. It was very positive. There's a question before Mike. There is no question before Mike. What are you on about? Desert Island Question. I am not seeing a Desert Island Question. So repeat the question or give up forever. It was Mike's question. So you're just confusing the issue now. Well, I've answered your question, you penis. What are you on about? I've answered it. I have said the top 3 in this pile for me would be these 3. Okay? Oh, for God's sake. Alright, these would be the ones that I would watch over and over again. Are they the best films on the pile? Maybe not, I don't know. But they are my favorite ones, yeah. So you want some recommendations, Todd? Well, you'll have to rewatch the video. Give us some views. Right, so let's not forget what this video is for. Please, 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 guys, now is not the time to give up. We need to keep sharing. We need to keep spreading the words. Now it's the time where we should be getting a lot of you know, help on this crowdfunding. It's about to be over. We have 7 more days. That goes very fast. I remember not so long ago we were on the first day and I was like, oh, what's going to happen? And now we're at the end of it. We've raised almost half the money, which isn't enough. But you know, it's great. It's a great achievement already, but we can do better. And as Sarah mentioned it, yes, YouTuber seem to get a lot of help on their crowdfundings, as I found out the other day. But that's fine. We're in a different situation, and so yeah, we need to. I know it feels like the end, but that's why we need to not give up. Yeah, I mean, Jack, yeah, YouTube channel, that's fine, but it's a commitment. And I, you know, doing a live once a week for now, it's fine. But then, you know, I've got to do some work. I've got a film to make. I've got some essays to edit. I can't realistically commit to something like that at the moment. You know. All right. Any more questions? Because we've been on it for 2 hours. It's gonna get awkward. I'm surprised this computer didn't kick anyone out. Last time I couldn't stay more than 10 minutes. Okay, well, in that case, I think that's it. Thank you, guys. Not bad at all. That was interesting. Well, I hope you found it interesting. I had a good time talking about these films. I hope some of you went, oh yeah, do you know what? I'd watch that. That sounds interesting. That sounds like my kind of thing. Or, oh, I've never seen that. I'd love to see it. I hope John finds Shetan somewhere, gives it a watch, and then I'll be waiting for your feedback, John. See if you liked it or not. Here we go. All right. thank you very much. And next week we have a couple of lives planned. I think one with Andy and then one with Mike, just for the last push. Okay. Meantime, keep spreading the word for Derelict. Keep sharing. We have to try and find this money any way we can. All right. Thank you, guys.